Hello there, this is Teresa Litchfield. I'm going to share some different fun and easy techniques with ink blending that just give some added love to the look of your cards and projects. I've used some different ways of doing that with each of my examples. And with the new Love and Friendship release from Altenew, they've created some really fun products that are just beautiful to use with your inks. I also wanted to use the new Pantone colors for 2021, which are Illuminating and Ultimate Gray. I used a few of the new products on this card. I just love the texture of the background, but you can see the yellow really brightens that dark background up. Let me show you how I did that. I start out by using the Our Friendship Bloom set, and there's a stamp, a coloring stencil, and then also a die that goes with that. And the coloring stencil is cool because you can use that or you can use the solid stamps. The die is great because it cuts out that whole bouquet after you're done coloring it. And I'm going to use the sentiment from that stamp set also. Whenever I have a stamp that has a long end like this stem, I like to place it in the die, if it comes with one, before I put it in the MISTI. That way when I go to cut it cuts out perfectly. I'm going to stamp that outline stamp with the Industrial Diamond, and that's just going to give me a little bit softer look on the outline so I can ink blend over it. I'm going to use the solid stamp for the largest flower, and I'll use Citrus Burst, which is the lightest color, and then I'll use the stencil to color over it with some darker colors for some dimension. I've added all these stamps for the leaves, except for that largest leaf right there. That one's just a little too close to the other ones. I'm going to use Limeade for the first stamping of these. So you can see here what I'm doing is just using the solid stamps for all the images to add the lightest color, and then I'll use the coloring stencil to come in and add shading afterwards. So now I'm going to add that largest leaf. I'm going to add color to that, and that was Limeade. It was just too close to stamp at the same time as the other leaves. I'm going to use Pink Diamond to stamp the two smaller flowers, and I have to stamp those one at a time also. So after I stamp the two little flowers, I'm going to stamp the rose, and you'll see me make a big mistake. And I just didn't really look at the stamp very good, but I'm going to use the Pinkalicious ink, and I stamped that with that. Like I said, you'll see me when I make the mistake. And here I see, oh no, what'd I do? I thought I was coloring the rose, but it looks like I was coloring the stem, so don't do pink for the stem. So I let it dry, and I stamped it again with fresh leaf. And if you do that with the dye inks, you can stamp over the top of it. And fortunately, it was a complementary color, so I could do that. So I stamped it twice, and it recovered that from my big mistake. So here's the correct stamp for the inside of the rose. And it's just going to stamp a little bit inside of it. I'm going to use the Pinkalicious, which is the correct color this time. And the rest of it I'm going to color with the coloring stencil. So now that I'm done coloring my base colors of everything, I'm going to use the stencil now. And this is Honey Drizzle. And this is going to go on the inside of that large flower. And I take my small blending tool, and I'm just kind of tapping and a little bit of a circular motion just to get some shading and some darkness in there. Using different colors of ink really makes your image look more lifelike. There's a stamp for the inside of that large flower to enhance the stamens. And I'm going to use the orange cream ink to do that with. And stamp that, and they'll just pop out a lot more. There's a second stamp for the stamens, which adds even more detail. I'm going to use the fire brick, and it'll just stamp the very tops of those stamens. I'll use the stencil again to add more color to my rose, and I'll use the Pink Diamond ink to do that with, and my small blending tool. The stencil makes it really easy to add more color to your image. I added a little bit of Pinkalicious to the center of the small flowers. And then I'm going to move that stencil and color the stems with lime ink. I just thought it was a lot easier to use the stencil than lining up the stamp for the stems, and I really liked how it turned out. I also used the Evergreen artist marker and just added some shade to the top and the bottom of the stems. I just think adding that depth to the different parts of the flower really make the light colors pop. And I like that so much I took the same marker and added some shade to the base of the leaves. I then took the Forest Glades marker and blended it over to the top of the evergreen, and it really softens that marker out. And I did that on all the leaves. I also took that same marker and added a little bit of green to the center of the flower. Now that I'm done with all my ink blending, I can cut that out, and you can see that dye just cuts it out beautifully. For the background, I'm going to use the new Organic Linen 3D embossing folder. And I love to sew, and I really like different textures and fabrics, so this really spoke to me. So I inked up the entire folder with the industrial diamond and spritzed it with water and ran it through my machine. And look how gorgeous that is. So I decided I wanted this to look more like fabric, and so I ink blended with limestone on the white space. And not to keep it white, I just wanted it to be a color. So the limestone's got a little bit of warmth to it, and just colored that like a linen would be. And then I'm going to use the pure graphite to add some shading and make a frame around the edge of that. I felt that would really highlight my flowers in the center. I often do that in photography and give my photo a vignette, and that's kind of the same idea. I really like how that's coming together. I wanted to use some extra texture, so I'm using the burlap texture die, and I covered that with the antique gold heat embossing powder and heat embossed that. And then I decided I like that so much, I'm going to use the Versamark pen and make little dots in the center of the flower. And I'll put the gold heat embossing powder on top of that, just kind of tie it in. Here's an up close look at that, and I just love how that shines and it's got that metallic shimmer to it. In keeping with the Pantone colors, I decided to stamp my sentiment with the pure graphite ink, and then I'll use embossing ink and then clear heat emboss that. I added a strip of the Warm Sunshine cardstock from the Summer Afternoon Gradient cardstock pack to make my sentiment stand out. And then I left a little bit of the strip on the bottom just to give a little more white space to it. And I added some aqua shimmer pen to the centers of the flowers. I had so much fun coloring everything, and I really think that yellow and gray really balance each other out. And I'm just in love with that embossing folder. I'm going to use that a ton. For the next card, I decided to make two because I'm always needing a wedding card and never seem to have one on hand. So I'm going to show how I made this one because the technique and style of the card is more unique. To make those, I used the Fresh Roses outline stamp. I'm going to start by stamping the largest stamp in the set with vanilla cream, and I put the cardstock and that stamp on my left side of my Missy so I can get the whole stamp in there. This is a light blush pink cardstock, and I'm going to ink blend now with Lavender Fields, my small blending tool. And I'm going to just start right in the center and just kind of add a little bit of color right to the center of those roses. And you really want to do one flower at a time. And then I'm going to do blush. So now I take the blush and I'm going to go around the lavender fields. And I'm just kind of go in a circular motion and just surround each color. And now the rouge. I'm going to end up stamping the whole background panel of this, but you really want to do one flower at a time. So now I put that back in my Misty, now that I've inked it up, and I'm going to stamp it with I actually am going to use the Enchanted Gold pigment ink. You can use your embossing ink. I decided to use this. It actually gives a really nice embossing, but I embossed it with the Antique Gold embossing powder. So now I'm going to flip that around. I'm going to add the second stamp in the set to that corner, and again stamp it with the vanilla ink. And I ink blended that up. And again with the Enchanted Gold, and heat emboss that. And now I'm going to do the other corner. So now I've flipped everything to the right corner of the Misty. But now I've ink blended everything and heat embossed it all, so that Mr. and Mrs. is going to end up being a focal part of the card. And so I took a piece of lavender cardstock and I'm going to ink blend with the lavender fills just around the edges of it a bit, just to darken it up. I love how that looks. And so now I take the Enchanted Gold and I ran that just around the edges. And I'm going to end up heat embossing this with the Antique Gold. And I don't use my anti-static powder tool to do this. I just ink it up and put the embossing powder and let the embossing powder go wherever it wants to. So now for my focal sentiment in the center, I use my T-ruler to find out like where the center of the card is and how wide the sentiment is. And then I mark it and draw a line on each side of the sentiment so I can cut it out. So now you can see kind of what I've done. So I'm going to place everything back in the Misty so I can stamp the sentiment. And I did cut those strips down so there's a border of the lavender paper around. So place everything back in there and line up your sentiment in the center and pick it up with the Misty door. And then I'm going to stamp it with the Enchanted Gold pigment ink again and emboss it with the gold embossing powder. Because that Enchanted Gold is a pigment ink, it stays wet longer and you can use it to emboss. It does give a really fine embossing. So after I've embossed that, I'm going to take those two strips off. I decided I wanted to ink blend just a little bit close to the sentiment and kind of around it just to give more of a shadow. And then I'm going to take those strips and I added some fun foam to them to pop them up and give it some dimension so that sentiment is kind of down into it. This is an easy way to ink blend an outline stamp. And this just has a really simple but elegant look to it for a wedding card. So I had to make a yellow one and I used the largest stamp from the set and ink blended in the same way. And I used Pink Pearl, Buttercream, and Mango Smoothie inks and did the same thing with the heat embossing around it. I also added some jewels for a little bit of bling. So like I was saying, I always need a wedding card, and this was a really simple way to make one, and I can make them fast. And I love the sentiments in this. I love the style of the writing in the sentiments. The next card, I felt like it really needed to be a slimline card to be able to see the entire stamped image on the front. It's a really versatile set, and I was really excited to use this. This is the Tall Foliage stamp set, and it has some really great sentiments in there. And again, it's perfect for slimline cards. You can also get the simple coloring stencils and the dies that go with the set. I'm going to pair that up with the Vintage Garden set. And actually in the Tall Foliage set, the little booklets that come with the sets, this is actually a set that is recommended to use with it. So it also has a coloring stencil too, and dies that go with it. So to start up the card, I'm going to use limestone and ink blend with my small blending tool on the left side of the front of the card. And this is the lightest color, so I'm just going to add a little bit of a light shadow on just the one side. And this is a white panel of I used like an 8 5/8 by 3 5/8 size, and then I'm going to come in with the silver stone next to the limestone and add a little more depth on that edge. But again, I flipped it around, but it's going to be on the left side. So that's just going to make a nice backdrop for my main stamp. I'm just going to stamp that right on the panel. And I put that in my MISTI. And here's that large tall stamp. And I'm going to stamp that with Industrial Diamond, which is in that set of inks also. And then the little one, I kind of have it hanging. I know it's hard to see here, but I've got it hanging off the bottom. And it doesn't stamp all the way, and we'll see that in a second. Here's how I keep the small blending tools, and I've color-coded them for each color family and just kind of store them so they're easy to use. I'm going to use the coloring stencil now to color it, and I use the moss first, just on the tips of the leaves and a little bit on the base. And then I'll use the olive and color most of the leaf. I showed the parrot, but I don't end up using that because the image is just, the leaves are too small to use 3 colors. So here's the olive, and it just kind of brightens things up. Because I've stamped on that background panel, I'm masking everything off to make sure I don't get ink where I don't want it. And I'll color that smaller image just the same way as I did the tall one. Now I'll take the largest flower from the Vintage Garden set, and I'm going to stamp that in my MISTI, and I use Silverstone to stamp that with. And then I'll color it with the coloring stencil, and I'll use the pumpkin pie first, and then the mango smoothie, and then butternut. I also color the leaves on the flower the same as I did on the tall foliage stamp on the front of the card. And I masked off the flower so I don't get any ink on the flower as I'm ink blending that. I'll cut that out with a coordinating die, and I'm just going to place it on the card front so I can situate my sentiments. And I decided to use a couple of them. I'm going to stamp them with the Obsidian Black Pigment ink and then clear heat emboss those. I decided to do some splattering, and so I'm going to use Industrial Diamond first. And I add that right onto my glass mat, and then I'll add some water to that and just add some light color to it. I usually use black, but I wanted it to be soft, and so I'm just holding my hand kind of over the image so I don't get too much on that, but more around it. I'm also going to use the same technique with some white gouache. I love the white gouache because it's very opaque and looks very, very chalky and really shows up. So now I add some foam adhesive to the back of my flower, and I always use a lot. And situate that, and I've got that so that leaf hangs off the edge just a little bit, and my envelope is going to be wide enough to accommodate that. For a little finishing touch, I wrap some jute around the bottom of the card and then add it to a white card base. I also made an envelope for the card, and I used some cute pattern paper I had on hand. I've got some tutorials for that, and I'll link that at the top. I really enjoy making slimline cards, and they're just a different size and just changes things up a bit. So this next card is also that size. This die is really fun, and when I saw it, I really wanted to make something in that traditional Art Deco look. And so here's the die, the Slimline Deco cover die set. And there's 2. I'm just going to use today the largest one, but it does come with the 2 sizes. And I have some tricks I use. I'm also going to use the adhesive sheets, and that's really a must for this. There's also the new Tall Alphalora case, a stamp and die set that just came out. I'm going to use the dies for this card today. So I cut an adhesive sheet the same size as that large die and ran that through my die cut machine. And I'm just taking the fallout pieces on that release paper and I'm saving them, and you'll see why. I've cut a piece of the gold mirror cardstock, and that's going to be my background and the black on top of that. And I cut the black down a little bit so it's got a border around it. And I want a shadow on the black cardstock. So to get shadow on black, you have to use something lighter. So I'm using a white pigment ink. So I'm going to go around that. I have a small blending tool just specifically for white. And I go around that and then I kind of rub it off. And it just kind of gives that smoky, shadowy look on the black. I've adhered the black to the gold panel, and now I'm going to put that main dye on. And let me tell you, without those adhesive sheets, this would not be a very fun thing to do. But they just make it super easy. And so I put that on there and just press it on with my bone folder. And they stick really, really good. And now I'm going to take those fallout pieces that I was showing earlier, and I decided to add those around it to kind of fill that space up. So these are literally all the fallout pieces from that die, and I'm just putting them on the outside edge to kind of mimic where they came from. I found a lot of those pieces that were really fun to just add to it. And you can see I just keep finding them and adding them on. And I just didn't want them to go to waste. I found a couple of smaller pieces. I even found one from the piece that's cut out from the center and on the corner of it, and added that to it also. This just really had the look of like a Great Gatsby or just kind of an old movie. I also took some of the adhesive sheet and added it to some gold mirror cardstock and cut those letters out. I wanted to just say hello in the center. So I cut out 2 black and I also added the adhesive to that, stacked those on, and then the gold one on top of that. I'm telling you, using those adhesive sheets is just so much easier when you're working with these thin dies. So after I have those stacked, I line them up with the grid on my glass mat. And then I put a piece of tape on them when I have them the way I like them. And then I can put them onto my card. But I always use my T-ruler to make sure everything is straight. And then I can press them on with the bone folder and remove the tape. I really love how that ink blending with the white on the black just really created that smoky, mysterious look to it. And it's just another fun way to look at your products differently. I always have so much fun with new products and coming up with some different ideas and just playing around with them. I hope you liked the cards and techniques I showed today. If you did, I would really appreciate it if you just take a minute and like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss any videos. I've also got a couple other videos here at the end that you might enjoy. Thank you so much for spending your time with me, and I really hope you have a great day doing something you love.